They told him nobody had left him anything, just a key to a tractor. Dylan Matthews stared at the manila folder Mrs. Patterson had slid across her desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like a funeral dirge. At 18, his time at Riverside Children's Home in Columbus, Ohio was officially over. But unlike the other kids who had families waiting or college plans, Dylan had nothing except $47 and also mystery. Mrs. Patterson avoided his eyes as she spoke. These are your documents, Dylan, birth certificate, medical records, and anything we have on file about your background. The folder felt impossibly light for a life that had spanned 18 years. Dylan had been left at a fire station when he was 3 days old, wrapped in a yellow blanket with a handwritten note that simply said, "Please love him." He flipped through the standard forms, vaccination records, report cards that tracked his unremarkable journey through the system. Then at the very bottom, he found something that made his heart skip. A small envelope, yellowed at the edges, with his name written across the front in careful cursive. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. Mrs. Patterson glanced at it and frowned slightly, like she'd forgotten it was there. "Oh, it was left with your intake paperwork when you were a baby. We don't usually give these out until a child ages out, per protocol. I suppose it slipped through the cracks until now." Dylan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper and something small and metallic that clinked when he tilted it. The paper contained a handwritten note, brief and cryptic, for Dylan when he's old enough to understand. "Nobody left you anything but this. Use it when you're ready. The tractor knows." It was signed with just an initial, J. Dylan stared at the words until they blurred. The tractor knows. What kind of message was that? He reached into the envelope and pulled out the metallic object. It was a key, old and brass, with a worn leather tag attached. Stamped into the leather were 2 words, Milfield Ranch. Dylan looked up at Mrs. Patterson, his throat tight. "Do you know what this means?" "Milfield Ranch," she shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, Dylan. I have no idea, but that note and key have been in your file since you arrived, but there's no other information." That night, Dylan lay awake in the narrow bed he'd slept in since he was 7, staring at water-stained ceiling tiles. Most of the other kids had already left, scattering to relatives or foster placements or the streets. The room felt emptier than it ever had, and the silence pressed down on him like a physical weight. He held the key up to the dim light filtering through the window, studying every groove and scratch. The next morning, Dylan packed his life into a single duffel bag. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the folder of documents, and the mysterious key. He also grabbed the yellow blanket he'd been found in, now faded and threadbare, because letting go of it felt like erasing the only proof he had ever existed to someone. If you've made it this far into Dylan's story, you know that sometimes the most unexpected discoveries change everything. Hit that subscribe button for hard stories and stay with us as Dylan begins a journey that will reveal truths he never imagined. Because sometimes, the family we think abandoned us was actually preparing a path home. Love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it whispers through decades, waiting patiently for the right moment to be found. Dylan stepped off the Greyhound bus into the crisp Montana air, his breath forming small clouds in the October chill. Milfield was barely a town, just a main street lined with weathered buildings, a diner, a hardware store, and a post office that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. After 67 hours on buses and 3 connections, Dylan felt completely out of place in this mountain valley, surrounded by snow-capped peaks. He walked into the diner, a place called Mountain View Cafe, where the smell of fried eggs and bacon wrapped around him like a warm embrace. A woman behind the counter, probably in her 50s, with graying hair tied back, looked up with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone neither welcoming nor hostile. Dylan slid onto a stool and set his duffel bag down. "Just coffee, please, and maybe some information." She poured a steaming cup and set it in front of him. "Information costs extra around here. What do you need to know? Dylan pulled out the key and placed it on the counter. I'm looking for a place called Milfield Ranch. Do you know it? The woman's expression shifted immediately, surprise flickering across her weathered face. She picked up the key, examining it closely. Milfield Ranch. She repeated slowly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Now that's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in years. That old place has been abandoned for over a decade. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Dylan more carefully. Why are you looking for it? Dylan hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger. I think someone left it to me, or at least left me a way to find it. The woman studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp but not unkind. You're not from around here, are you? When Dylan shook his head, she continued, I'm Rose Martinez. I own this place, and that ranch you're asking about belonged to a man named James Richardson. Rose's voice took on a different quality as she spoke about James. He was a good man, kept to himself mostly after his daughter left, died about 12 years ago, and nobody claimed the property. The county tried to auction it off, but nobody wanted land that isolated. It's just been sitting there ever since, collecting dust and memories. James. The initial J. Dylan's heart began to pound. Did he have family? Rose's expression grew complicated, shadows crossing her face. He had a daughter once, Sarah. She left town when she was 17, pregnant and desperate. There were harsh words between them, the kind that cut so deep they never heal. She never came back, not even for his funeral. Her voice carried a weight that suggested she understood something about family fractures. Dylan gripped his coffee cup tighter. What happened to her? Rose shrugged, but there was sadness in the gesture. Word came back years later that she died young, some kind of sickness, left behind a baby, but nobody knew what happened to the child. The state took care of things, I suppose. She looked at Dylan with new understanding dawning in her eyes. How old are you? Son, 18, Dylan whispered. Rose nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. James used to drive into town once a month, always around the same time. He'd go to the post office, send letters somewhere. Never said where, but he'd come back looking like a man carrying hope and heartbreak in equal measure. An hour later, Rose closed the diner early and led Dylan to her pickup truck. The ranch is about 8 miles east of town, she explained as they drove through rolling hills dotted with cattle. The road's gotten pretty rough over the years, but the main buildings are still standing. James built that place to last, even if he couldn't make his family stay. They turned onto a gravel road that wound through tall grass and wildflowers that had reclaimed the land. At the end stood a 2-story ranch house, its white paint peeling, but its bones still strong. Beside it was a large red barn, its roof sagging slightly but intact. And there, parked under a lean-to shelter, was a tractor. It was old, probably from the 1960s, with faded green paint and tires half buried in weeds. Rose put the truck in park and looked at Dylan. You sure about this? Dylan nodded, gripping the key tightly. I have to know. She smiled gently. I'll wait here for a bit, just in case you need me. Dylan stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on gravel that hadn't heard footsteps in over a decade. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through the trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. This was it. Whatever answers he'd been searching for his entire life started here, with a rusted tractor and the ghost of a man named James Richardson, who had somehow known his name before he was even born. Sometimes our biggest fears and greatest hopes lead us to the same destination. The courage to keep walking forward, even into uncertainty, becomes the bridge between who we were and who we're meant to become. Dylan approached the tractor slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Up close, the machine looked even more weathered than he'd expected. Rust covered the wheel wells, the seat was cracked and faded, and spider webs stretched between the steering wheel and gear shift. But despite its condition, there was something solid about it, something that had endured when everything else had been abandoned. On the side of the tractor, near the engine housing, was a small metal plate bolted to the frame. Most of the paint had chipped away, but Dylan could still make out engraved letters. J. Richardson, 1967, and below that, in smaller letters that made his breath catch, were the words for Dylan, always. His hands shook as he pulled the key from his pocket. James had known about him, had known his name. Somehow, this man he'd never met had carved Dylan's name into his tractor, long before they could ever meet. The key didn't fit the ignition. It was too small, too ornate for something mechanical. But when Dylan lifted the old spring-loaded seat, it creaked open to reveal a shallow compartment underneath. Inside was a wooden box, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. The wood was dark and smooth, clearly handcrafted, and on the front was a small brass lock. Dylan held his breath and inserted the key. It slid in perfectly. With a soft click, the lock opened. The first thing he saw was a photograph, old and slightly faded, showing a young woman holding a baby. The woman had dark hair and eyes filled with both love and sadness. The baby was wrapped in a yellow blanket, Dylan's yellow blanket. He flipped the photo over. Written on the back in the same handwriting from the note was Sarah and Dylan, 3 days old. Beneath the photograph was a letter, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn thin. Dylan opened it carefully, afraid it might tear. The handwriting was shaky, written by someone whose hands weren't steady anymore. "My dearest Dylan," it began. "If you're reading this, then you found your way here, just like I hoped you would. My name is James Richardson, and I'm your grandfather. I know you never got the chance to know me, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. Your mother, Sarah, was my only child. She left home when she was 17, pregnant and scared, determined to make it on her own. I was angry then, too stubborn and set in my old ways to chase after her. By the time I tried to find her, she was gone." The letter continued, each word heavy with regret. "I didn't know about you until after Sarah died. A social worker tracked me down when you were about 4 years old and told me you were in the system. She said Sarah had gotten sick and passed away when you were still a baby, that she'd made arrangements for you to be cared for, but never reached out to me." Dylan's vision blurred as he kept reading. "I wanted to bring you here. Dylan, I swear I did. But I was 73 years old, sick with a heart condition, and living alone on a failing ranch. The state didn't think I was fit to care for a child. And maybe they were right. Maybe I couldn't have given you the life you deserved. But James hadn't given up entirely. So I did the only thing I could. I made sure you'd have something when you were old enough, something that couldn't be taken away by bureaucrats or the passage of time. I put aside everything I could, sold off the livestock, and saved every penny. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give you a real start." The letter explained that the ranch was Dylan's, held in a trust that would transfer to him when he turned 18, but only if he found this place. James had wanted Dylan to come here, to see where he came from, to understand that he wasn't unwanted. You were loved, even by people you never met. The letter concluded. There was more in the box, bank statements showing a trust account with $25,000, property deeds, and at the bottom, another photograph. This one showed James as a younger man, standing next to another man, both of them smiling in a way that spoke of deep affection. On the back, someone had written James and Michael, 1978. Dylan stared at the photograph, understanding flooding through him. James hadn't just been a lonely old rancher. He'd been someone who understood what it meant to love differently, to live carefully in a world that didn't always accept who you were. The letter suddenly made more sense. The careful way James had structured everything, his insistence that Dylan find his own way here. When Dylan finally looked up from the box, Rose was walking toward him, having grown worried about how long he'd been silent. Her face was gentle with understanding. "You found what you were looking for, didn't you?" Dylan nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Rose squeezed his shoulder. James was a good man who carried more pain than most folks knew, but he never stopped believing that love finds a way, even across impossible distances. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't our presence, but our faith that they'll find their way to where they belong. That truth hit Dylan like a revelation. He hadn't been abandoned. He'd been loved by people who couldn't stay, but who had spent years building a bridge across time, hoping he'd be brave enough to cross it. True family isn't always the people who raise us. Sometimes it's the people who believe in our future so deeply that they're willing to sacrifice their present to make sure we have somewhere to call home. The ranch house key turned with resistance, as if the building itself was reluctant to give up its secrets. Dylan stepped inside, Rose close behind him. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light, streaming through dirty windows, and the air smelled of old wood and memories. But beneath the neglect, Dylan could see the bones of a real home. The living room had a stone fireplace, built-in bookshelves, and furniture arranged as if James had just stepped out for a moment. On the mantel above the fireplace, Dylan found more photographs. James at different ages, always alone except for one picture that showed him with the same man from the photo in the tractor. They were standing in front of the ranch house, James's arm around the other man's shoulders. Rose noticed Dylan studying the photograph. That's Michael Chen. He was James's, well, I suppose you'd call him his partner. They were together for almost 20 years, back when that kind of relationship had to be kept quiet in places like this. Michael died in 1998. Car accident on his way back from Billings. James was never quite the same after that. Dylan felt a chill of recognition. His grandfather hadn't just understood difference in theory, he'd lived it. The careful way James had hidden his relationship, the isolation he'd chosen rather than face judgment. Suddenly, Dylan understood why Sarah had run. She'd discovered her father's secret and couldn't reconcile it with the narrow worldview she'd inherited from their small town. In the kitchen, Dylan found evidence of a life lived simply but with care. Cookbooks with handwritten notes in the margins. A coffee cup still sitting by the sink, as if waiting for its owner to return. But it was upstairs that Dylan found the room that changed everything. Sarah's bedroom had been preserved exactly as she'd left it. The walls were painted a soft blue, and there was a twin bed with a patchwork quilt folded neatly on top. A bookshelf held teenage novels and school yearbooks. On the dresser was a jewelry box and several framed photographs of Sarah at different ages. But it was what Dylan found in the closet that brought him to his knees. Behind a row of clothes that still smelled faintly of lavender was another wooden box. This one wasn't locked, and inside Dylan discovered something that shattered his heart and mended it simultaneously. Letters, dozens of them, all addressed to James Richardson, all in Sarah's handwriting. The earliest ones were postmarked from Denver, then Phoenix, then various addresses across the Southwest. Dylan opened them with trembling hands, reading his mother's words for the first time. Dad, the first letter began, I know you're angry, and maybe you have a right to be, but I couldn't stay. Not after I found out about you and Michael. Not because I think it's wrong, but because I realized I've been living in a lie my whole life. You let me believe that love was supposed to look one way, and now I don't know what to believe about anything. The letters chronicled Sarah's journey from anger to understanding to desperate love. She wrote about her pregnancy, about being scared and alone. She wrote about Dylan's birth, about how perfect and tiny he was, about the overwhelming love she felt. I named him Dylan after Michael's middle name. She wrote, I hope that's okay. I want him to carry something good from our family. Then the letters grew darker. Sarah wrote about getting sick, about not having insurance or family support, about being too proud to come home but too desperate to keep pretending she could handle everything alone. The final letter was dated just weeks before she died. Dad, I'm not going to make it. I can feel my body giving up, and the doctors confirm what I already know. I've made arrangements for Dylan through the state. I couldn't bring him back to you, not after everything that's happened between us, but I'm leaving him something. I'm leaving him the key to that old tractor where you and Michael used to hide your letters from his family. When Dylan's old enough, maybe he'll find his way home. Maybe he'll understand that love comes in all forms, and that just because we couldn't figure out how to love each other doesn't mean we didn't try. Tell him about Michael if he ever comes looking. Tell him that our family was built on love, even when it was complicated. Dylan wept as he read those final words. His mother hadn't abandoned him out of rejection or shame. She'd been a frightened girl who discovered that her father's hidden truth had complicated her entire understanding of family and love. She'd run not because she hated James, but because she'd realized how much they'd all been hiding from each other. Rose found Dylan sitting on Sarah's bed, surrounded by letters and photographs. Her own eyes were wet as she surveyed the evidence of a family fractured by secrets and misunderstanding. James kept this room exactly like this for 30 years, she said softly. He hoped she'd come back someday. When she didn't, he hoped you would. That evening, as they sat on the ranch house porch watching the sunset over the mountains, Rose told Dylan more about James's final years. He never gave up believing that family finds a way back together. She said, even when the cancer was eating him alive, he was still working on that trust fund, making sure everything would be ready for you. He used to say that love isn't about being perfect or getting everything right the first time. It's about building bridges strong enough to hold up under the weight of mistakes and misunderstandings. Sometimes it takes generations to cross those bridges, but they're worth building anyway. Dylan understood now that he hadn't inherited just property and money. He'd inherited a legacy of love that had survived secrets, death, distance, and time. James and Sarah and even Michael had all contributed something to the foundation he was standing on now. The most powerful inheritance isn't money or property. It's the courage to love authentically, even when that love has to travel through generations to find its way home. Winter arrived early in Montana that year, blanketing Milfield Ranch in pristine snow that made everything look clean and possible. Dylan had spent the last 2 months learning to be a landowner, a role that felt simultaneously overwhelming and natural. The trust fund David Harrison had helped him access covered immediate needs, but Dylan quickly learned that running a ranch required more than money. It demanded community. That community hadn't welcomed him easily. Word had spread quickly through Milfield about the young man who'd inherited James Richardson's place. Some folks were curious, others suspicious. A few were openly hostile, especially when they learned Dylan was gay. The hostility crystallized around Tyler Richardson, James's bitter nephew who'd spent years expecting to inherit the ranch himself. Tyler had hired a lawyer from Billings to contest the will, claiming undue influence and questioning Dylan's legitimacy as an heir. The legal battle stretched through December and into January, with depositions and court hearings that drained both Dylan's savings and his spirit. But it also revealed something unexpected: the depth of support that existed in Milfield's quieter corners. Rose Martinez became Dylan's fiercest advocate, attending every hearing and introducing him to other families who'd been helped by James over the years. There was the Chen family, Michael's surviving relatives who remembered James's kindness after Michael's death. There was Pastor Miguel Santos, who'd quietly counseled James through his grief and who spoke powerfully about the ranch owner's character. Most surprisingly, there was one Marcus Thompson, the elementary school teacher who'd grown up in Milfield and returned after college in California. Marcus was Dylan's age, with gentle eyes and a quiet strength that reminded Dylan of his grandfather's letters. They'd met during a particularly difficult hearing, when Marcus had stood up in court to testify about the anti-bullying work James had quietly funded at the school. Their friendship deepened through the winter months as Marcus helped Dylan understand the rhythms of rural life. Marcus had his own experience with being different in a small town, and his patient presence became an anchor for Dylan during the legal storm. They spent evenings in the ranch house kitchen, planning spring planting and dreaming about the future. The breakthrough came in February, when Rose made a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning out her diner's storage room, she found a box that James had left with her years earlier. Inside were documents that proved Tyler's claims false, James's medical records showing clear mental competency, and most damning of all, correspondence between Tyler and his lawyer dating back years, discussing plans to challenge any will that didn't benefit him. The court dismissed Tyler's case with prejudice, awarding Dylan full ownership and ordering Tyler to pay legal costs. But the victory felt hollow until the community celebration that Rose organized at the diner. Nearly half the town showed up, bringing casseroles and congratulations, sharing stories about James that Dylan had never heard. Old ranchers talked about James's quiet generosity during hard times. Families shared memories of Michael's gentle teaching at the local school before budget cuts eliminated his position. Young people spoke about feeling safer in Milfield because they had heard whispers that the Richardson Ranch was a place where different kinds of love were understood. Dylan realized that night that he hadn't just inherited a ranch. He'd inherited a legacy of quiet acceptance that James and Michael had built over decades. The property wasn't just land, it was a foundation for something larger. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. Dylan enrolled in online agricultural courses while beginning the physical work of bringing neglected fields back to life. Marcus helped him plant a vegetable garden where Michael's flower beds had once flourished. Rose connected him with young LGBTQ people from surrounding counties who needed safe spaces to gather. By summer, Milfield Ranch had become an unofficial community center. Dylan hosted monthly potluck dinners on the big front porch, bringing together families who might never have mixed otherwise. The barn became a venue for local artists and musicians. The back pasture hosted camping weekends for LGBTQ youth from across Montana. The ranch was alive again, filled with laughter and conversation and the kind of chosen family that James and Michael had dreamed about but never quite achieved. Dylan kept their bedroom exactly as it had been, honoring their memory while building something new on the foundation they'd laid. One evening in late August, as Dylan and Marcus sat on the porch swing watching fireflies dance over the pasture, Marcus asked the question that had been building between them for months. "What are we building here, Dylan? Are we just friends? Or is this something more?" Dylan looked out over the land that had taught him about patience and faith, about love that transcends conventional boundaries. "We're building home," he said simply. "Everything else will grow from there." As autumn returned and Dylan prepared for his second winter in Montana, he understood finally what James's letter had meant. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and family isn't always the people who share our blood. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the space to become who they're meant to be. And sometimes the greatest courage we can show is accepting the family we choose rather than mourning the family we lost. The yellow blanket from his childhood now rested on the bed in James's room, which had become Dylan's room, connecting past and present in threads too strong to break. Every morning, Dylan woke up knowing exactly where he belonged. Have you ever discovered that what felt like rejection was actually redirection towards something better? That sometimes love works across time and distance in ways we never imagined possible? Share your story with the Heart Stories community, because your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And remember to subscribe for more stories about finding family in unexpected places, because everyone deserves to come home.